Vanguard Zombies, whether you love it or way more likely hate it, clearly wasn't the product anyone at Treyarch envisioned. It's very obviously under-budgeted, understaffed, and undercooked in nearly every regard. And when you hear stories about how the project's development cycle was allegedly less than 4 months from conception to release, all of this game's issues start to make a lot more sense. But in spite of all of the stuff that is clearly very, very wrong here, which we will certainly get into, there are some diamonds in this rough that I think are worth highlighting. So, without further ado, let's dive right into Vanguard Zombies. So first off, as I usually am inclined to do, I want to discuss the stuff that the game gets right before ripping into it a bit. I mean, if you're making YouTube reviews, you gotta give everything a fair chance after all. Right? Starting off the good proper, we have the Rampage Inducer. For those unfamiliar, the Rampage Inducer was a feature gifted onto us mortals in Cold War Zombies' 5th season that completely removes the downtime between rounds and makes all zombies have an incredibly high chance to spawn in as super sprinters, even if it's only round 1. Let's just go ahead and turn that on forever. Okay, now I'm good. As for global gameplay elements, Vanguard features a lot of returning features from Cold War Zombies, including the crafting table, zombies dropping equipment of all sorts, armor vests to soak up a bit of damage, and pack-a-punch weapon tiers. Upon the mode's reveal, I derided the game for seeming way too similar to the last one to justify its own existence, but for better, and definitely worse, I was wrong. See, there's two big changes from Cold War that make the core experience play much differently: the sacrificial hearts, and the per-match upgrade systems. Let's start with the hearts. Every round in War of the Dead, and every 3 in round-based, you'll be awarded with a corrupted heart that you can use at the Tome of Rituals to increase your artifact's power, or you can trade it in at the Altar of Covenants. For the uninitiated, the altar appears as a shop of sorts with all sorts of per-match buffs that increase in power the longer the match goes on. The shop's covenants change out every round, and despite the general increase in rarity and power, the abilities offered are completely random with every single reset. This RNG element behind the altar has bugged a lot of players, but I love that element so much because it incentivizes you to keep experimenting. If you could choose your covenants every match, I would have never moved on from Call the Weak and Cryo Freeze, because, well, the theory behind dominant strategy exists for a reason, but since I'm not guaranteed to get those every match, I've come up with all sorts of different builds, some which I like even more, like combining Motherload with Splatterfest and Explosive Expert. With this setup, you can be constantly firing off explosives and lobbing equipment around with reckless abandon. Or maybe I'll grab Deadshot with Dead Accurate and Critical Expertise if I want to focus entirely on high damage headshots. And this setup is my personal favorite. You can swap out the covenants as the match goes on to create all sorts of weapon and class combinations, and that alone adds a ton of replayability, even to bad experiences. What's even better is that none of them are really worthless. Sure, there's ones that don't need other covenants to work well, like Deadshot and Artifact Ward, but ones like Scrapper, Deadwire, and Cryo Freeze can still be really great if you pair them with a specific playstyle and a few other covenants. Experimentation really is the name of the game here, as it always has been in Zombies, and I would absolutely love to see this feature become a mainstay in future titles. Another feature I'd love to see return, perhaps a bit more controversially, is the perk tiering system.
Have you lost your fucking mind?
Now, I'll admit right off the bat to being a bit biased here, because I hate out-of-match player progression in Zombies. To me, having certain things being gated off by an artificial leveling system just doesn't jive with the mode's core, which has always been explore the map, learn its secrets, and use everything in that map at your disposal to stay alive. Rewards for super dedicated players after a season was finished, like Director's Cut in Infinite Warfare or the Pact in Cold War, were completely fine though. Those are just fun little bonuses as opposed to core progression that's built into the game, and they can be turned off if you don't like them. So, perk progression. Rather than purchasing a perk once and being done with it like previous titles, each perk fountain has 4 tiers. The first tier is free, the second is 2,500 points, the third is 5,000, and the fourth is 7,500. A lot of players have taken issue with just how expensive this system is, but I love it because of how pricey it is. Look at me being a contrarian, aren't I special? Really, that way I have to think about what I really want to invest in early on. Sure, I could put it all into Juggernog for that really nice 300 health, but then I might not have enough to put into Speed Cola or Stamina, and this makes it so that you're always working towards something. If you want 2 fully packed weapons and maxed out perks, it's probably going to take you until at least round 15 in War of the Dead and 35 in round-based. And by that point, super sprinters are starting to spawn in, and they're hitting way harder. So the playing field is still pretty even, despite how powerful you become since round 1. Speaking of high rounds, the excessive pricing makes it so that if you go down in the higher rounds, you are heavily penalized. For as much as I love Cold War Zombies, you're not really penalized all that much for going down later on, because you can just buy everything important back in the Wonder Fizz in 5 seconds for like 15,000 points. In Vanguard, if you lose all your tier 4 perks, you instantly feel that drop in power and have to run around the map and spend 37,500 points just to get back up to tier 4. And God help you if you go down twice. That'd bring the total up to 62,500 points? Jesus Christ! If that price tag don't put the fear of God in you, I don't know what will. This system, alongside the leveling of your artifact, addresses one of my big problems with Cold War Zombies, and to a lesser extent, Black Ops IV, zombie to player power progression. Once I finished all the upgrade trees in Cold War, which took all of 15 minutes to accomplish, I felt way too powerful in the early game, to the point where there was literally zero challenge. The Rampage Inducer helped a bit, but I still felt like the balancing was way too far in the direction of the player, especially with how ridiculously strong the perks were in that game. In Vanguard, I feel like I'm on a pretty level playing field throughout, mainly with the Rampage Inducer turned on in round-based maps. And because your artifact uses the same currency as the altar, you have to weigh your options a bit in the early game. Okay, do I spend the heart to make my special ability stronger, or do I maybe hold on to it just in case the altar refreshes with something good next round? This type of resource rationing is something that I wish had been applied to the last few games that have had special abilities. The Electro Snails in World War II, some of the less busted elixirs in Black Ops IV, and the wands in Cold War. While they are great additions that shake up the gameplay, the mechanical implementation always felt a bit off to me. Like I said, Zombies is all about utilizing things inside a map and doing a hard reset every game. So having these special abilities that leveled up outside of a match, that always felt a bit weird to me. But in Vanguard, it's all implemented way more naturally. Now, there is a problem with this system's implementation: the perks themselves. They're simply not interesting enough because they're all flat number increases. Like, imagine if each perk had the effect of Cold Wars. Let's say, for example, Juggernog. Each tier would still give the health increases, but they would also give you special abilities like Cold War. Tier 1 would reduce status effect durations like stuns by 50%, Tier 2 would make armor plate pickups worth more, Tier 3 would increase armor durability by 25%, and Tier 4 would make it so that on a lethal hit, you don't go down, but your armor is fully depleted instead. While Vanguard's implementation isn't perfect, I do think this idea is the way to go with this stuff going forward. Make it so that you actually have to work for those absurdly powerful abilities Cold War introduced, instead of, okay, I played for an afternoon and I guess I'm just better than other people now. Another element brought over from Cold War, but technically started in Black Ops IV, is the steady increase in difficulty and AI aggression as the match progresses. At the start of every game, zombies are your classic Romero-styled walkers. They only hit for 20 damage and can be put down without much fuss. However, as the match goes on, the zombies evolve into 28 days later style runners, known as super sprinters, that'll rush you down if you stop moving for a second. To make things even harder, once you kill one, the timer between another spawning in is shaved down to literally nothing, and they hit for a massive 100 damage. However, to balance things out, players can dish out massive amounts of damage as well, and the zombies have a health cap unlike pre-Black Ops 4 titles, where the health would scale infinitely, until the game literally could not calculate it and it broke. Here's that number, by the way, just in case you were curious. This makes high round gameplay quite frenetic and challenging, but fair, and raises the potential skill ceiling way higher than previous games. Depending on your setup, of course. If you have a launcher with Explosive Expert and Splatterfest, yeah, of course nothing can touch you, which alongside things like Aether Shroud is a topic of balance for another day. But if you're playing with just about any other weapon, you need to make your shots count and keep the enemies at a distance. Helping this balance along are 3 key improvements made to Cold War's difficulty. Number 1, no armored zombies of any kind exist. I didn't mind the light armored zombies in Firebase Z, but the heavy zombies, oh, you motherfuckers. In a game so focused on multipliers and making headshots matter, why on earth would you introduce a common enemy type that completely nullifies all weapon multipliers with heavy armor plating? Completely jettisoning these things from the game makes me so happy you have no idea. Number 2, the point at which zombies hit harder and move faster happens way quicker. In Cold War, you had to wait until round 46 for them to reach maximum lethality, and round 55 for them to all start super sprinting, whereas in Vanguard, you only need to wait until round 31 and 38 respectively. And 3. Super sprinters are somehow even faster and more aggressive than ever. They were already fast in Cold War, but just look at these little guys go.
This is Zach hunting for gash.
This is me getting fucking pussy. Where is it? I need it.
Here comes the fish.
I need it.
Look, I'm getting old and my reaction time ain't what it used to be, but in Zombies, I'm still pretty fast, and because of that, I felt like I could plop down a ring of fire literally anywhere on the map, and because of my decent, albeit aging reaction times, nothing could touch me in Cold War. But in Vanguard, I still play super aggressive, but because of how quick and unrelenting the zombies are this time, I feel a bit uneasy about it and still get my ass kicked sometimes when I make bad decisions. Which is what the game should do. You should always be punished for playing like an idiot. Speaking of, one final gameplay element that I really like is just how brutal you can make the match if you're an idiot, if you so choose to. Because zombie damage caps at 100 per hit, you can completely forgo Juggernog, and because default player health is only 100, you can play the game a single hit from death if you don't have armor. Combine that with the hyper-aggressive super sprinters and god, that's so much fun. Unforgiving, yes, but fun nonetheless. If you, like many people, find these new games to be a bit too easy, give this a shot for a minute. Moving on from gameplay, let's talk about something that's a bit more of an obvious standout to really any player. The game's art direction. After the incredibly common and, to be honest, fairly accurate critique of Cold War's lacking art direction, Treyarch decided to mix things up a bit. No longer is the game a milsim environment with zombies. Instead, we get a dark and eerie take on the mode, very reminiscent of the quote-unquote good old days, but this time with a very heavy focus on the demonic, occult side of the Dark Aether. The best example of the art direction, by a country mile, is Daron Fang. Upon loading into Stalingrad for the first time, you feel like you're back in a classic Zombies map. And I don't mean like Black Ops III classic. I mean World at War Black Ops I classic. Like, I couldn't be the only one who kinda got a World at War Der Riese vibe from Stalingrad, right? The environment is incredibly dark and lonely feeling, with the middle of Stalingrad only being illuminated by a few stray light fixtures, the moon overhead, and the eerie red glow of Cortifex's containment spell. Exploring the environment, you'll find burned out buildings, demonic seances, dark aether crystals slowly terraforming the arena, and piles of German and Soviet corpses just waiting to be reanimated. The sub-environments fare just as well too. From Tonga's fiery windmill to Shino Numa's barely lit hut, they all have a unique presentation that screams classic Zombies. Terra Maledicta's main hub world isn't as interesting, but the Hall of Truths, and especially the Corrupted Plains, are fantastic. The plains in particular are interesting to me, as they show that the Dark Aether wasn't always this purple nightmare like it was under Zaikov's reign. In fact, through Verkana, we're told that this area used to be a place teeming with life and was stunningly beautiful, but during the Nether Wars, Cortifex torched the lands and the natives that inhabited it, leaving a scorched hellhole and a single, seemingly unkillable survivor in its place. If this is the way that Treyarch wants to go with their zombies visuals going forward, I am fucking here for it. Moving on from the visuals, we have the characters. Well, the human characters are kinda boring, so let me rephrase that. The demons. Vanguard introduces us to a new cast of demons, 5 of which appear as close allies through this game's replacement for the wands of Cold War, the demonic artifacts. Functionally identical to the wands, each artifact holds an ancient Dark Aether entity within that upon bonding with a human host, will lend them their ethereal powers and speak to them, offering both knowledge of their realm and battle commentary alike.
I am the Destroyer, hero of the Nether Wars. Let us wade into battle together.
As stated by the developers, it's an unlikely team-up, but it's one that I really enjoyed because each demon has a vastly different personality that brings a lot, but not all, of that charm back to zombies that was missing from Cold War. Nordicus is a stone-cold war general and tactician. Invictor is a battle-hungry warrior always eager to jump headfirst into a fight. Belikar is a kind-hearted mom scholar eager to teach those she comes into contact with. Verkana is a wise old sage with a deep respect for the sanctity of life. And Syraxis is basically just an unhinged shitposter that loves to see things go wrong.
I love fireworks. After all, I helped invent them.
God, she's great. Can we have her and Peck shoot the shit with each other in the next game, please? Something else I really love about these demons is that their personalities gel super well with their abilities. For example, because of Invictor's thirst for a fight and his somewhat brutish nature, his Ring of Fire boosts an operator's offensive capabilities far more than any of the other artifacts, whereas Nordicus's Frostblast has a nice balance between offense and defense since he's more tactical in his approach to combat compared to Invictor. Or Belikar, since she's more of a historian and teacher than a soldier, her Aether Shroud has next to zero offensive capabilities, but lets an operator continue their objective despite the advancing hordes. Now, as much as I love this inclusion and would kill you, the viewer, to see it return in the next game if I had to, the realist in me just doesn't see that happening because of how much time it would take behind the scenes. Think about it. In Cold War, aside from, actually coding the ability, which is no simple task, mind you, all they had to do was change the wand's canister color and slap a new decal on it. Vanguard's approach requires the creation of a whole new character, finding the right actor for that character, writing hundreds upon hundreds of lines of dialogue, implementing all those lines into the game, creating an entirely new artifact, designing the character itself, their lore, and so much more. And I really can't see them doing that again. In a perfect world, we would have this approach in the next game alongside an actual crew that would converse with the demons during downtime like Stuhlinger and Richthofen. But reality is a cruel mistress. Now that I've had a bit of time to gush over the demons, let's talk about the lore and world surrounding those little scrimblows. Their story begins during the original Aether story, funnily enough. Mirroring humanity, the inhabitants of the Dark Aether have their own hierarchies, cultures, and even royal families. And, like humanity, they always assumed their world was the only one out there. They never knew about Earth, Agartha, or the multiverse. But after the events of Tog der Toten and the collapse of the multiverse, artifacts such as the Mystery Box and Pack-a-Punch Machine made their way into the Dark Aether. These arrivals alert the particularly curious inhabitants to the possibility of another world. Among these was an outcast known as Syraxis, donning the moniker of the Shadow after her less than pleasant breakup with her husband Cortifex. She was among the first to truly discover humanity, and while she couldn't directly interact with her newfound playthings, she went out of her way to fuck with them by appearing in campfires, the crystal balls of psychics, or behind easily spookable people in their reflections. When this got boring, she sought out the help of Belikar the Warlock. Together, the two would eventually come up with the demonic artifacts that would allow them to seal themselves within and bond with humans in other worlds. My girl really invented interdimensional travel just to fuck with humans in the flesh. Good for her. Good for her. With the arrival of these ethereal demons came many legends. Invictor was often known to the Greeks as Ares, Cortifex was mistaken as Osiris by the Egyptians, and Syraxis was known to the Japanese as... oh, good Christ, here we go. Kitsunetsuki, a fox-like spirit that would possess young women. But the most interesting addition to the Dark Aether saga, in my opinion, is the Construct, an ancient, all-powerful monolith that's been around since the beginning of time itself, theoretically even before the Order of the Keepers. But what's so interesting about a big funny rock? Well, two things. One, we have literally zero idea where it comes from, and two, we're told in the Archon that it's so powerful that it could theoretically wipe out all life in any universe like it was nothing, yet chooses not to for reasons not entirely understood by anyone. The best guess that even the most knowledgeable historians like Belikar and Verkana can posit is it's largely ambivalent to those beneath it and prefers to watch what happens. My man's got big Ryuk energy. Due to its immense power, it became an object of worship for those in the Dark Aether, and throughout history, many have petitioned the construct in a bid for power, but due to its largely ambivalent nature, it's only found a select few worthy. Those it bestowed power were crowned Archons, and were powerful enough to rule with no hope of contest. Now this is how you hook a viewer. Give them just enough to comprehend the current narrative, but leave a lot to the imagination so that players always have some lingering questions to mull over. Questions like, what even is the construct? Where did it come from? What's its endgame? Or does it really just play everything by day? Did Kazimir Zykov petition the construct after the events of Endstation and that's how he rose to power as the Forsaken? Is this thing a part of Richthofen and Project Janus's endgame? Well, if Director Eddie is anything like his previous incarnations, of course it is. My man loves power in every universe, even when he's pretending like he's doing it all for a better tomorrow. Vanguard undoubtedly fumbled its finale, like, really badly, but this one little element is so damn good that it'll definitely keep this arc of the story in the back of my mind for quite a while. And the last element that I like to bring up before moving on is the soundtrack. While original music dropped off pretty quick, the tracks that are there are all pretty good. Daron Fong's round transitions, the sacrifice objective underscore, and of course, the transmit theme, which goes comically hard. The only problem is that it's way too low in the mix. This isn't maximum volume, by the way. Ah well, that's what asset rippers like Greyhound are for, I guess. So, there's a surprising amount of things that I really do like about this game. Hell, even I was surprised at how much I had in that segment of the script. But, unfortunately, there's an equal amount of bad that brings almost all of this goodwill tumbling down. Let's start with the most immediately obvious, the objective mode. In stark contrast to Cold War's approach of starting with round-based and then introducing an objective mode once there was a solid foundation, Vanguard launched with no round-based, and the only mode on offer was an objective mode I lovingly referred to as War of the Dead, inspired by Darren Fong's original name. So what do you actually do in this objective mode? Well, you go through portals, complete 1 of 5 objectives, and... Okay, but for real, this mode has some neat ideas, and I genuinely like most of the objectives themselves. But the mode is horribly flawed in execution. For starters, there aren't enough objectives. The game only launched with 3 of them: Blitz, Harvest, and Transmit, and only 2 more, Purge and Sacrifice, were added before Treyarch completely abandoned the mode and switched focus to round-based. As fun as some of these can be when the game gets going, the fact of the matter is, there's not enough variety here to keep players invested until they can actually get to that point. By the time most players even reach round 10, they're probably ready to throw in the towel because of just how horribly slow it all is to get going. Contributing to this is another massive issue: the awkward setup and the amount of time spent doing absolutely nothing. Every time you do an objective, you have to teleport to the location, listen to the same few bits of dialogue, then listen to even more dialogue after you're done, and teleport back. Even worse, you have that pace-killing teleportation even when the objectives are in Stalingrad. So if there's a sacrifice objective next to the theater, you have to go to the portal just to teleport 10 meters away and start the objective. Like, what? This is super awkward and completely kills the pacing every time it happens. But instead of being a negative Nelly and using terms like that because I'm apparently 5 years old, how would we fix all this? Very easily, actually. Well, in theory at least. Maybe the portals are actually a necessary evil to load in assets and scripts and all that jazz, but if they're not, here's what we would do. You would still have to teleport in the early game to open up parts of the map, but to make things a bit more interesting, all initial portal locations are the new arenas: Tonga, the hotel rooftops, and Shinonuma, thus giving players a taste of all the locations early on while leaving the main hub unexplored until they do it themselves. Later on, if the objective was in the hub world once the map was fully open, let's say a Blitz holdout in the apartments, the player could travel there by foot and there'd be a runestone waiting for you. If you were to interact with it, the co-op vote prompt would still appear in team games, and if the vote was successful, all teammates would be teleported to the location. But in solo, the Blitz boundaries would instantly block all exits and start the objective upon interaction. Same goes for things like a transmit. Simply interact with a head to start the objective. Nice and simple. Now, if this sounds familiar, it should. This exact thing was already done in Outbreak. Although I gotta give credit where credit's due, having a team vote option in co-op is a great idea. I can't tell you how many holdouts have been started while I was actually doing something on the other end of the map, and I couldn't do anything about it. But back to Darren Fong. Like I said, later on, once zombies start super sprinting and you're all powered up, the individual objectives are genuinely fun, especially some of those blitz spots. Like, fuck, that one on the staircase in Darren Fong is rough. But to get there, you have to go through this absolute slog of a setup that's constantly cut off by teleportations and monologues, and there's not even a hint of challenge for almost 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay. At least Outbreak let you skip some of the early rounds by shooting the beacon. And you know, there were things to do in that mode. Speaking of, what made Outbreak work wasn't the main objectives. Sure, they were all fine except fucking you. But the real fun of that mode was the open world, the exploration, the vehicles, the variety of enemy encounters, the special events, and most importantly, the sandbox approach to each match. It was definitely a different kind of zombies mode, and I completely understand why it didn't work for some people. But War of the Dead's decision to shrink everything down into one tiny little map file and cut out the sandboxy aspects shows a fundamental misunderstanding of why Outbreak worked for so many people, which ultimately ends up kneecapping any good ideas this take on the objective mode may have had. Terra Maledicta, however, is where the fundamental problems with this mode become even more clear. Because of how the objective gameplay is set up and just how bare bones the hub areas are, you really just feel like you're getting the exact same experience as Daron Fang. And like Daron Fang, once you open the map, there's literally nothing to do except for go into the portal to do another objective, which gets real boring real quick. Outbreak had the same problem, but to a much lesser extent, because even though the maps felt similar and there was a set amount of objectives to do, that mode had a bunch of randomized world events like black chests, fury crystals, and tons more alongside the main objective. There was a ton to explore and scavenge for in the regions themselves, and there was even the occasional mini-boss encounter with your mom. Fucking sucks. This made it so that there was something for both extremes. If you like to just plow through the region and maybe just do a side objective along the way, you could. If you were like me and wanted to spend a bit more time exploring in the early game, you could, and you were rewarded for it. But as much as I genuinely love Outbreak, even I have to admit, the formula still needed a bit of work, but it undeniably had a lot more meat on its bones. Now let's compare all this to Vanguard's objective maps. There's no world events, exploration, or randomized elite encounters. So now you need to ask, what is there to do besides the main objective? What reason is there to explore these hubs besides grabbing perks? What does the game loop have to differentiate the maps, or hell, even the matches themselves? Well, there's unique dialogue for the transmit objective if you're in the Dark Aether.
Feels strange to be back here. Sometimes Earth feels more like home.
Okay, cynicism aside, that's a cute detail. So after Terra Maledicta failed to resonate with really anyone, Treyarch made the surprise announcement that they were switching focus back to round-based gameplay and completely discontinuing updates for the objective side of things. I think that pivot caught us all by surprise, and to be fair, said pivot in development took some major balls. They could have easily dug their heels in, refused to change anything, and just kept insisting this is the way to go. But they didn't. And as an artist, it can be really, really hard to put your ego aside and come to terms with the fact that the new thing you're trying just isn't working like the old thing. I mean, look at Infinity Ward. They're still insisting even 4 years later that removing gunfire pings from the minimap isn't a terrible fucking idea. But the fact that Treyarch were able to recognize that this approach wasn't resonating takes a lot. I still think that a mode like this can work, as Outbreak proved, but the way it was done here was never going to work without a complete overhaul from the ground up, which, realistically, would never happen with a title like this. Hopefully next time, should Treyarch want to do some more extra modes alongside round-based, the team has the proper time and resources to see their vision through properly instead of whatever the hell happened here. Moving on from War of the Dead, let's talk about something that applies to the entire experience: a general lack of polish and quality assurance. This is what really brings the game down. I really do love a lot of this game's ideas. Like, I cannot stress how much I love the foundations of this game's round-based mode, but it's so unbelievably jank and buggy that I let out a long Wings of Redemption-esque sigh every single match. Oh, come on, Rizzo, I hear you interject. This is a multi-million-dollar AAA experience. How many bugs and how much jank could there really be? Let's find out. Zombie AI is a bit scuffed across the board and doesn't always keep track of the player properly. Zombie spawning and general pathing on Shinonuma is super jank. If you're running around the map, they'll often spawn in weird places and not even repath for a while. Ring of Fire still occasionally spawns in weird locations or just doesn't spawn at all. The energy mine only deals 300 damage in round-based, making it nearly worthless in those maps, but it works just fine in the objective maps. Detonating a boom schreier next to a decoy will sometimes destroy it. I honestly don't know if this is intentional or not. Sturmkriegers can perform a melee charge out of a portal spawn, which, if you just so happen to be next to a spawn point, can lead to you taking an unfair hit or even a down. Picking up a fire sale will cause the game to hitch super hard. And no, this isn't a result of poor dedicated servers. This happens in fucking local play.
Look! Look! What the fuck is this?
The zombie movement speeds are completely fucked in Terra Maledicta. In the main hub world, no matter the round, zombies will never move faster than a lighthearted jog, even though they should be super sprinters like in Daron Fang. Same goes for the Void objective in that map. For some reason, they're bugged to only ever walk. so the only fun part of the map just doesn't work. If you destroy the doors with a ray gun, their mesh will be destroyed, but their collision has a chance to stay stuck in whatever position it was in when it was destroyed. So if you destroy a closed door, that door can just be stuck forever.
Door stuck! Door stuck! Please, I beg you!
It took until Season 5 Reloaded to remove the muzzle flash distortion from Pack-a-Punch weapons, which, can we talk about that real quick? Someone somewhere got paid to make the screen blur every time you shoot your gun. In a first-person shooter, which is amazing enough on its own. But the crazier part is that this decision had to be approved by numerous people, and at no point did a single one of them go, hey, that's a horrible fucking idea. Literally, why would you ever add this? And even after the really late Zombies fix, the ray gun's Pack-a-Punch effects still have that distortion. Come on, guys. So it's like 2 in the fucking morning when I'm recording this. I had the whole thing done, and then I just found out about this gem. So in this game, there are zombie hit animations that do not have impact sounds. I did not edit this at all. I swear to God. This is in the game. Nice. Now, I'll admit a lot of this sounds nitpicky, and in some cases, it is. But this stuff adds up. Like, 1 or 2 little things is fine. We're all human, and we all make little mistakes from time to time. But when there's something small that's wrong at just about every single turn, it starts to erode the entire experience and just makes it feel super unpolished. And the cherry on top of an underwhelming objective mode and a poorly QA'd game is the story, which is terribly unsatisfying. I love the lore and demons, if I hadn't made that just a bit obvious, but the actual narrative they're stuck in is awful. The setup is really cool though. During the closing hours of World War II, a sect of Nazis known as DeviantArt were tasked with exploring the occult in hopes of finding something supernatural that they could use to tip the tide against the Allies and ensure the future of Hitler's Reich. Hey, wait a second! After the activation of the cyclotron in Morosco, 5 ancient artifacts in DeviantArt's possession were activated, and Oberfuhrer von List bonded with an entity known as Quartifex the Deathless, who has the power to raise the dead. With this power, von List marches his troops across Europe, reanimating the corpses of past conflicts with the aim to use that army to crush the Allied forces. A fucking fantastic setup, but the game does nothing with it, and we literally spend the entire story just going around in circles as our cast only visits 2 maps in the entire season. Even if you had the exact same events play out, if we had gone to new locations each time, that would have given the journey a bit more scale. Instead, we start out in Stalingrad and a few sub-areas, then go to the Eastern Desert, some plains in the Dark Aether, then back to one of the areas from Stalingrad, then back to the fucking desert and the same Dark Aether arena. For comparison, let's look at World War II Zombies. We start out in a quaint little village in Germany, then a mysterious island with a weird history. Then we're smack bang in the middle of the Battle of Berlin. Then we travel across a war-torn Europe, only to end up in the lost city of Thule, where we discover the remains of an ancient society, often misinterpreted by early humanity as the Nephilim. There was scale and a constant sense of escalation, but in Vanguard, we just go in circles with no consequence to the larger world until the game comes to a screeching halt and says, here's a half-baked boss fight, the end. Speaking of, that's another cherry you can put on top of this sundae, the Archon. You know, the quote-unquote epic finale to Vanguard Zombies that literally does not have an ending. In fact, let me show you.
We did it, Professor. You, your soldiers, all of us.
Is that it?
That's literally it! There's no cutscene, there's nothing.
That's it. There is no ending.
That's it?
I'm not fucking with you, that's it. But I have a theory as to why they did this, and for once, it's not budgetary. As we all know, Zombies and the Dark Aether story is coming back in Treyarch's next title, but they're still fairly early on in the mode's development. I think that they didn't have the entirety of the next game's narrative written yet, and didn't want to accidentally box themselves into a corner with the Archon. They obviously have a general outline of where they want to go, but the finer details probably aren't set in stone yet. So if they killed off a major character or cast the demons back into the Aether, they might find themselves in a situation where they wouldn't be able to use them later on when they're writing those finer details in the next game. If that sounds like I'm hitting that copium really hard, you're right, but at the same time, I don't think it's exactly outside the realm of possibility either. And finally, we come to the ugly. A segment that I've never actually had before in any of my videos, but sometimes things are just so bad that you have to bend your format a bit. So if you were scratching your head wondering why I hadn't brought up the development issues yet, well, here you go. Oh man. Where to even start with this? Like, honestly, where do you even begin? I guess we'll start at the beginning. November 5th, launch day. Daron Fong released completely barren, even more so than Black Ops I or Cold War. The map launched with only 3 main objectives, no wonder weapons, no support weapons on the crafting table, no main quest, no Tome of Rituals, no Pack-a-Punch camos, which is a first, and Von List's office, which was actually shown as fully completed in the original behind-the-scenes video, wasn't opened until Season 1. Oh, and you literally could not pause the game in solo play because someone decided that every Zombies match needs to be on dedicated servers? What the fuck? Adding insult to injury, there was even dialogue left in the release build for objectives that were planned but never had the chance to be implemented, such as Bellicar's defense objective, which, judging by the dialogue, would probably function similarly to Elizabeth's DASA station defense in Outbreak.
I can take Von List's transmissions, but you must protect the equipment. Protect the communications equipment while I steal their secrets.
To put it lightly, the state of Vanguard Zombies on launch was pathetic, which is a word I try not to use because it's really fucking rude to the people that poured their heart and soul into these projects. But I doubt that even they were happy with the state this released. Seriously, try and put yourselves in their shoes for just a second. While they were allegedly only given anywhere from 3 to 5 months of development time and had to learn an engine they were unfamiliar with in the process, they still tried their damnedest because at the end of the day, game developers are just a bunch of dorks like us that want to make something cool to share with the world. So to have the chance to make something cool that's played by millions of people across the planet, only to have that fucked with by people that only see your vision as dollar signs? That must fucking suck, man. And the worst part is, it never got better. A lot of times in gaming, you see these redemption stories where things start off pretty bad, but eventually, the games find their way. Even Call of Duty has had a few stories like this. Black Ops III Zombies was a shit show on launch, and World War II's multiplayer received a massive overhaul when Aaron Hallen took over as studio head. But this didn't happen with Vanguard Zombies. Sure, the missing gameplay features were eventually added, but as the year went on, the team size was cut down, people were pulled to work on other projects, and the budget was shaved down to almost nothing, which all culminates in the wet fart of a finale, the Archon. In retrospect, this game was doomed from the start, and it's genuinely depressing to see it die such an undignified death. So, in conclusion, Vanguard Zombies is a heavily flawed, compromised experience. But there's a lot of little things the game does get right that I'd love to see get reincorporated into Treyarch's 2024 title, such as the increased focus on the Dark Aether's weirder, demonic side, the per-match tiering systems, and the Covenants. However, that of course comes with a huge caveat of, you can't just abandon round-based like that, and the even huger caveat of, hey Activision, how about you give them a little bit of time to actually make the fucking thing? But more importantly, I feel like the few strengths of Vanguard prove something very important, and that is, Treyarch is willing to listen. Think about it. What were the most unanimous critiques of Cold War Zombies? A lack of personality for much of its cast, and the lacking art direction. What did Vanguard instantly improve on? Those two things. Vanguard has a ton of personality, and the art direction leans way more into the demonic side of the Dark Aether, as opposed to Cold War's fairly down-to-earth milsim approach. So even if the game didn't come out how anyone wanted it to, I still think that it's a sign of good things to come. Well, that's all for today. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, I have a ton of Zombies reviews on my channel, from Cold War to Black Ops IV to World War II, and more. But what about the IW review? I see dozens of you asking in my Twitter DMs. Well, that's actually what I'm working on next. A full retrospective on the game, but with a much more reasonable and less inflammatory demeanor than that old video, which was just way too mean-spirited at times. If you're wondering why the video went down, that's why. Obviously, since it's a much bigger project than a single map review, it'll take a hot minute to finish, but all I really hope for is that when it's done, it will have been worth your time. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.
I wish you could.
bitch? Where? I don't wanna fucking hear it.